So Megan Gass, this is Megan, serves as the Michigan Sea Grant Extension Educator for coastal communities surrounding Saginaw Bay with offices in Bay and Aranet counties. Megan supports local education programs and also provides regional leadership for the Center for Great Lakes Literacy, a Sea Grant-led network and partnership. The Center for Great Lakes Literacy promotes education about the Great Lakes and sustainable use of this freshwater treasure. Since 2018, Megan has helped organize Saginaw Bay Sturgeon restoration public release events and supports ongoing education and outreach efforts, such as today's presentation. So without further ado, here's Megan.
Thank you, Sam, for that introduction. And I'm super excited to be here today to share more about Lake Sturgeon and the ongoing efforts to restore sturgeon to the Saginaw Bay watershed. Before we dive in the content, I wanted to have a short activity for us to get a little more connected to Lake Sturgeon. So for all of those who are able, please stand up and want to participate. If you don't want to stand up, you can also raise your hand, but it's a little more fun if everyone stands up. So you can look around the room and you can see everyone is of varying heights. If you are shorter than 5 feet tall, please sit down.
Oh, wait, no.
It's a personal, this is an honest activity. So if you just sat down and you are shorter than 5 feet tall, you are not as tall as the average lake sturgeon's length. Now, if you are shorter than 5 feet 5 inches, please sit down. You are also not taller than a lake sturgeon's average length. Now, if you are shorter than 6 feet, please sit down. If I wasn't presenting today, I would be sitting down. Now look around the room. For everyone who is currently standing, congratulations. You are as tall as the average length of an adult sturgeon. So these fish, and you all can sit down now, thank you. These fish are gentle giants. On average, they can grow to be over 6 feet in length, but the fish, they can grow to be over 7 feet and weigh more than 300 pounds. So these are really big fish, and very excited to share about the efforts today. So like Sam mentioned, I work for Michigan State University Extension, and all of our programs are open to all without regards to any status. And here today, I'm sharing about the Saginaw Bay Sturgeon restoration effort. At the bottom of this slide, you'll see there are a lot of other partners beyond MSU Extension and Michigan Sea Grant that are involved in this project. It is a collaborative project involving a variety of federal, state, and local partners that are working to restore sturgeon to the Saginaw Bay watershed. Specifically for me, I work for the Michigan Sea Grant program, which is a collaborative between the University of Michigan and Michigan State University. We're one of 34 college programs around the country that works to enhance the sustainable use of the Great Lakes through research, education, and outreach. We have 4 focus areas: resilient communities and economies, healthy coastal ecosystems, sustainable fisheries and aquaculture, and environmental literacy and workforce development. We focus on the Great Lakes with our efforts, and as I said earlier, we focus on this through research, education, and outreach. But I really think of our work as connecting 2 really great institutions around the state as we work with a lot of different partners to support and enhance and protect the Great Lakes. Now, the Great Lakes are one of my favorite resources in the whole world, and I wanted to share just a little bit more about the Great Lakes before we dive into Lake Sturgeon. So around the basin, there's over 11,000 miles of shoreline, and they provide us with 20% of the world's surface fresh water. If we think about our world's water as a whole, 97% of the water on this planet is salt water. So there's a very small amount of the water that's available that is fresh and drinkable, and one of these sources is from the Great Lakes. Approximately 34 million people in the United States and Canada live in the Great Lakes Basin. And there's more than 3,500 species of plants and animals that are found in the basin, including more than 170 species of fish. And The combined surface area of the Great Lakes is about 94,000 square miles. This surface area is larger than Connecticut, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New York, and Vermont and Rhode Island all combined. So this is a really vast freshwater surface system. And just to put the 20% of the world's surface freshwater in a different lens, we think about it in gallons of fresh water. This is about 6 quadrillion gallons of fresh water. It's enough to submerge the entire continental United States in nearly 10 feet of water. So we're really lucky to have this freshwater treasure in our backyard, and there's a lot that we can do to protect it. So with one of my roles with Sea Grant through the Center for Great Lakes Literacy, a lot of what we focus on is Great Lakes literacy, which is an understanding of the Great Lakes influences on you and your influence on the Great Lakes. So someone that is Great Lakes literate understands the essential principles about the Great Lakes, but they're also able to communicate accurately about them to others. And then lastly, you can make informed and responsible decisions to help steward our Great Lakes and freshwater treasures. Here are our Great Lakes literacy principles, and these really serve as the foundation of our work. They mirror the ocean science literacy principles, and for today's presentation, we're going to dive in and explore some of these. So hopefully by the end of this presentation, you can leave here feeling a little more Great Lakes literate. Ones of importance for today's presentation include the Great Lakes support a broad diversity of life and ecosystems. The Great Lakes and humans in their watersheds are inextricably interconnected, and much remains to be learned about the Great Lakes. So now, let's dive into Lake Sturgeon. So here's a little bit more background about Lake Sturgeon. They were once one of the most common fish species in the Saginaw River system. And archaeological excavations on the upper Chippewa River found Lake Sturgeon remains more than any other fish. This family of fish is ancient. They actually date back to the upper Cretaceous period, and they were found not necessarily in the Great Lakes, because the Great Lakes weren't around, but they were found at the same time as dinosaurs. So these are really ancient creatures that have been around for a really long time, but unfortunately, due to a lot of human impacts, they are now in Michigan a threatened species. Now, in addition to the status of Lake Sturgeon as being a really important fish, it's significant for tribal nations and the Anishinaabe. This includes the Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi peoples, but Neme is Anishinaabe-Moan for Lake Sturgeon. And it is traditionally a source of wisdom and guidance. I would recommend, if you're interested in learning more, to reach out to partners from the Little Traverse Bay Band of Odawa Indians. They are also working to restore Lake Sturgeon and Burt Lake, working with partners from MSU Department of Fisheries and Wildlife. And they host Neme celebrations, just like we host public release events for sturgeon here locally, but it's a great way to go and learn more about the cultural significance of this species. So in Michigan, Lake Sturgeon are currently a threatened species. And here shows a map of the tagged Lake Sturgeon found in Saginaw Bay from 1995 to 2011. A 3-year study from Saginaw Bay WIN, the Saginaw Bay Watershed Initiative Network, found that there is no evidence of either spawning adult or juvenile fish or spawning activity in the Saginaw River watershed. Instead, it was considered to be more of a remnant population, so non-spawning population. So what happened to Lake Sturgeon? So in the early 1800s, Lake Sturgeon were viewed as a nuisance species since they just impacted negatively fishing nets. Thinking of on their sides, they have bony cartilage called scutes, and those bony scutes would rip the nets. So as a way to help avoid that impact, these fish were instead killed, dried, and burned as fuel. In the late 1800s, they were commercially fished, netted, and exported, and much of the world's caviar came from the Great Lakes. That is still one of the continued sources of Lake Sturgeon stress is the caviar. Their eggs, when poached, are very valuable. So it's really important to stop poaching and protect the sturgeon as much as we can. From 1900 to 1970, very little is known about the populations other than they were declining across North America. In addition, other impacts on the lake sturgeon included pollution and then erosion and sedimentation. These fish rely on really fast-flowing currents in rivers in order to spawn, and they need to have good spawning habitat, which includes interstitial spacing between rocks, which basically means having rocks that can go together and have little crevices for the eggs to nest in, but that can also protect them for potential predators of eggs in the food web. So it's really important to have that fast-flowing current and that rocky cobble as a substrate for spawning. And when there was a lot of erosion and the sediment settled in the rivers and out in the bay, it really impacted their spawning habitat. In addition, there was a lot of habitat loss that happened to sturgeon across the watershed. And a lot of this was to deal with dams. So like I said earlier, these fish require really fast-flowing currents in order to spawn. And here are all of the dams in the Saginaw Bay watershed. Some of these dams, have been removed. So that was an important step that needed to be taken in order to restore the habitat and help to support lake sturgeon. So here is some of the setting of the stage that needed to happen before the lake sturgeon restoration. This include removing dams and installing of rock ramps near Chesaning by Cole Park in the Shiawassee River, and then also near Frankenmuth by the Gunzenhausen Walkway. They removed a dam there as well and installed another rock ramp. So this allowed for the fish to pass safely, and it allowed for fast-flowing currents that these fish really need for spawning. Again, here are more photos of the rock ramps. And more. So it's really important to have those fast-flowing currents for our sturgeon. So here's a little video you can see of a juvenile lake sturgeon. This is from the Sturgeon in the Classroom program, which I'll share more about later, but it's a really great opportunity for youth to raise a lake sturgeon in the classroom, and that the little red curly worms in the tank, those were mealworms. And that's what the fish eats a lot when they're in these earlier juvenile stages. Out in the wild, they typically eat, even though they're very big fish, they typically eat a mixture of macroinvertebrates, so small insects that live in the water, and along with a mixture of like crustaceans and snails and even smaller fish. But even though these fish can get to be really big, they have a pretty, they are a very gentle spirit in the river, I would say. So starting out, the adult fish will enter into the rivers for spawning in the spring, and not all of these adult fish spawn every single year. When spawning, they lay eggs, and they stick to the rocks, and then after the egg stage, then there's the free embryo stage. These fish, they conceal themselves in the spaces between the large gravel and cobble. So again, that interstitial spacing between the rocks. Then as larvae, they drift downstream at night. And then in the early stage juvenile, this is when they remain in the river or in the river mouth. And this is typically the stage when we're releasing the fish in the Saginaw Bay watershed. Eventually, as a juvenile, these fish will move into the shallow Great Lakes waters. And then as adults, they will move around the Great Lakes basin and then eventually return home to spawn. So in order to address the status of lake sturgeon as a threatened species in Michigan, there's a rehabilitation strategy. The overall goal is to develop a self-sustaining population to remove sturgeon from the state threatened species list. These objectives include conserving populations that are currently self-sustaining, rehabilitating depressed populations, and reintroducing sturgeon to suitable vacant habitat. So we would be falling in the latter two bullets. So specifically to the Saginaw River system, the goal is to develop a self-sustaining population that could eventually provide sport fishing opportunities in Saginaw Bay. So our goal is to develop and build genetically diverse populations that will return to the Saginaw River system, determine differences in survival and return of Black River and Southern Lake Huron gamete sources, and build public support for this overall restoration effort. One of the important things is that these fish will return to Saginaw Bay. These fish, I didn't mention this earlier during the life cycle, it takes them between 15 to 20 years to become adults. So we won't know for a long time if this project is really working, but fingers crossed that it is, because we're really hopeful that sturgeon will be returning back to the Saginaw Bay watershed. So again, here are the objectives just a little bit bigger, along with some photos to highlight how we might be able to do this. So to complete these efforts, a lot of this includes streamside rearing. One of our sources for this project includes sturgeon from the upper Black River, but there are other streamside rearing facilities around the Great Lakes Basin that are working to restore lake sturgeon. So this is part of a larger collaborative effort to bring back sturgeon. So for our Saginaw Bay sturgeon, where are these fish really coming from? So there are two sources. One is Black River up near Black Lake, and these are reared by partners from MSU Department of Fisheries and Wildlife, Michigan DNR, and Sturgeon for Tomorrow. And then the St. Clair River is another source, and those are raised by partners from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, but they aren't raised down in southeast Michigan. Instead, these fish, they travel all the way to Genoa, Wisconsin, where they're reared in a national fish hatchery and then brought back to Michigan. But the goal here is really to have two different sources for genetics for these fish when bringing them back to the watershed. So here's some more information on the Black River system. This is a closed system between Black River and Black Lake, in part because of the Kleber Dam that disrupts their passage, but they have been studying sturgeon at the Black River Streamside facility for more than 25 years. And if you're interested in seeing what this facility is like, I have flyers that you can take, and we've developed a 360 tour of the facility. So you can actually go and see, and you can even dive underwater with the sturgeon researchers as they catch the sturgeon in the spring in the river. So the Black River populations, the 1997 to 2000 adult population estimates were between 350 to 400. Now, and this stat is from about 2019, so this number may be more. The adult population is over 1,000. And on average, the team of researchers, they handle between 200 to 300 fish per year, and these are adult fish. They go out and survey the adults and tag them, and then later on in the spring, they will actually collect the sturgeon when they're in their downstream larval drift, and those are the actual sources. So they're sturgeon that are completely reared in the wild and then taken to a further life stage in the hatchery. And then this is, they also do work with the Little Traverse Bay Band of Odawa Indians for supporting the Burt Lake restoration effort. So here's just a little more history on the Black Lake Sturgeon Project. The overall goal is to estimate population size and characterize annual spawning and stock abundance and structure. And they do a lot of different work that really helps us just better understand lake sturgeon. Even though these fish have been around for a really long time, there's so much we don't know about lake sturgeon. And here's more information on the background and history of the Black Lake Sturgeon Restoration Project and some of the work that they've been doing. But they've been active again for about 25 years. And you can even go up and visit the hatchery and guard sturgeon in the spring. So here's a fun video. You can see what it's like as a researcher. They actually go out and free dive and go out and capture these adult fish in nets. Again, these adult fish are usually more than 100 pounds, so big fish that they're catching in the rivers, and they bring them up for tagging. So this is just a fun little video of showing how to catch the sturgeon and how not to. So one was a little more successful than the other. The other source of Lake Sturgeon is outside of the Black River, and this is down near southern Lake Huron from the St. Clair River. Most recent estimates of this adult population is it's about 15,000 adults. And U.S. Fish and Wildlife, from 2016 to 2019, they handled a range from 180 to 240 fish a year. These fish are collected differently. Instead of it being during a larval drift, they collect adult fish from the river, and they collect their gametes. So thinking of the eggs or the milt or sperm, and then they do the fertilization process from both side, as opposed to having the sturgeon do it themselves. So if the females are injected with a common carp pituitary, and then the eggs are collected after that, and then the males are also injected with that same hormone, and then the sperm is collected or milt after that. So here are the overall plans for stocking sturgeon. The goal is to stock about 1,000 fish every single year. With the Saginaw River system, we wanted to stock the fish far enough upstream to give them more time to imprint in the river. Again, we don't really know what's going to happen fully 15 to 20 years from now when these fish go to spawn. But we hope by giving them more time in the river, it'll give them more time to imprint, and then hopefully they will return back to the Saginaw Bay system in 2037. So fingers crossed. But we've been stocking close to this amount of fish every single year since 2018. So here are our overall efforts, with the table just noting C stands for Cass, F stands for Flint, S stands for Shiawassee, and T stands for Tittabawassee. So starting in 2017, this was the initial year. These fish were only stocked in the Tittabawassee River, and then from there, beginning in 2018, we've been stocking more and more fish every single year. And just of note, we did not stock any fish in 2020 because of COVID-19. There were pretty much all of the hatchery facilities, they shut down for the year, so we weren't able to do any of the restoration work that year. But there have been a lot of effort to bring back the sturgeon. And in total, we've stocked close to 5,000 fish in the Saginaw Bay watershed since 2017. Now you might be wondering, what's happening to these fish after they're stocked? So every single fish receives a pit tag. These are passive integrated transponder tags, and they allow fisheries biologists to better understand where these fish came from. The issue with pit tags, you have to have a pit tag reader to know if the fish has a pit tag. So it's really something, it's a tool that is useful for more biologists. So if you capture a fish, you're not necessarily going to know firsthand where this fish came from. To increase understanding of what's happening in the bay, and actually before I move on, I will note the biologists did find one, I believe it was a fish from the 2019 stocking out in the Saginaw Bay this past year during the survey work. So the fish are living, but we're not really fully sure of what all is happening. So in order to increase understanding, and going back to those Great Lakes literacy principles, much remains to be learned about lake sturgeon. We're using acoustic receivers in the Saginaw River system and bay to help track where these sturgeon are going. So last year and this year, about 320 sturgeon fingerlings are being, have these special acoustic tags implanted. And this helps to track sturgeon movement and their dispersal distances, how long they're staying in the bay, or how long they're staying in the river before moving to the bay, and then their overall fish survival. So if you look here on this map, this is a map of all of the different acoustic receivers. So as the fish move past these receivers, it's kind of like a bing, and we can get alerted as where these fish are moving and where they're going. So it can really help us better understand what these sturgeon are doing after their release. We don't really have information to share yet from this project, but I'm really excited to learn what the researchers find about sturgeon movement and what is happening in the river and the bay after they're being released. Now today, I'm here sharing about Lake Sturgeon and making community connections. We've tried really hard with this project to engage as many of the community as possible, and I hope after today you'll be able to share more about Lake Sturgeon, but maybe join us in some of these other community engagement efforts that we do around the watershed. Every August and September, we host community release events where people can come out, learn more about the lake sturgeon, and actually get to release these fish. So we wanted to engage the public in this celebration because them returning back to the watershed is really a great signal for the return to the health of the Saginaw Bay watershed. We wouldn't be stocking these fish if it wasn't for all those habitat improvements that occurred before. So we want to engage and celebrate with as many of community partners as we possibly can. So we host public release events across the watershed, and these public release events would not be possible without local partners on the ground helping. So for the Tittabawassee River release, we partner with the Chippewa Nature Center. For the Cass River release, we partner with the City of Frankenmuth. For the Shiawassee River release, we partner with the Friends of the Shiawassee River. And then for the Flint River watershed, or the Flint River release, we partner with the Flint River Watershed Coalition. And again, these events are a great way for people to learn about a fish they might not know about, and then hopefully be able to share about this excitement, and we can engage more people in this restoration, and then we can protect the sturgeon for years to come. So here are the different locations where we release the fish, going from north to south. So the Tittabawassee River release, it occurs in Midland at the Caldwell Municipal Boat Launch. And it's important to note we intentionally chose sites that were farther upstream, but also sites that would be good locations for community engagement. So we wanted to have dual purpose for these release locations, and we do the same release locations every single year in order to better understand what's happening to these fish in years to come. At the Cass in Frankenmuth, we release the fish into the Cass River by the Gunzenhausen Walkway. And then the Shiawassee River, we release them by Cole Park in Chesaning. And then for the Flint River, we release them at Mott Park Recreation Area in Flint. And these events have been a really great way to get people to come out and learn more about lake sturgeon. If you are interested in joining us for future events and you're wondering, how can I sign up? If you put your name and email here, we will send an email once we have the date set for August and September of this year for the release events. And you can also learn more by visiting SaginawBaySturgeon.org. In addition to the public release events, we're also working with formal educators to engage youth around sturgeon in their classroom. So through the Sturgeon in the Classroom program, select classrooms around the state, and this is a really limited program, less than 20 classrooms around the state are participants. But they're raising a lake sturgeon in their classroom and then releasing it into the nearby rivers connected into the Saginaw Bay watershed. So we have 2 schools participating this school year, St. Laurent School in Frankenmuth and Lakeville Middle School in Otisville. The St. Laurent School, they release their sturgeon into the Cass River, and then Lakeville, I believe, they travel and release it into the Tittabawassee River. We also support educator professional developments. So up here, we actually brought educators from around the state up to Onaway, where we got to meet with sturgeon biologists and get to ask questions and tour the streamside rearing facility. And they got to learn more about sturgeon and actually get to see some of the researchers out handling these big fish in the river. So it's a really great way to learn more about sturgeon and how you can engage your students around the topic. Another pilot we tried during 2020 was a community science effort. One of the things that the researchers in the Black River system want to know more about is the overall food web in the Black River system, thinking of potential predators and prey. Lake sturgeon as a whole, once they get to be their adult size, we're the ones that are hurting sturgeon. But when they're in their smaller stages, and mainly like the free embryo and larvae stage, there are other predators in the system that is when they are most at risk for predation. So with this project, students got to learn more about fish identification, and they actually watched videos of the river in Black River, and then they got to identify the fish. The biggest takeaway from this project, though, was just about lake sturgeon. We were hoping for some bigger ideas of them better understanding coupled ecosystems and a predator-prey relationship. But some of the biggest takeaways were just that these students learned that lake sturgeon were a fish. At the start of the project, some thought lake sturgeon was a lake. So it was a really great way for them to engage, and now we're at a phase where we're trying to figure out how we can engage more people in this project, because while it was a really great project, it was very time intensive. And the data that the researchers received, it wasn't necessarily the most usable, but the community engagement and education benefits, that was really the key takeaway from this. So we're trying to see now how we can repurpose this into a new program in the future. Now you might be wondering, how can I help? So some of the ways you can help is by helping to support our lake sturgeon restoration. You can learn more by visiting SaginawBaySturgeon.org. And there's other ways that you can help on the ground too, from participating in our release events, and then also guarding the sturgeon. So while we don't necessarily have a spawning population here yet in the Saginaw River system, we hope to in the future, but one of the current threats that remain for lake sturgeon is poaching. Their caviar, their fish eggs, is very, very valuable. And remember, it takes between 15 to 20 years for lake sturgeon to reach adulthood. So that's a lot of time, and these fish, they don't spawn necessarily every single year. And when a lake sturgeon is harvested for caviar or for its fish eggs, that is the end of that fish's life. There's not really a way you can keep those eggs at the same time when harvesting. So it's really important to protect sturgeon from poaching. And that's one of the things that Sturgeon for Tomorrow does. You can actually go and guard the sturgeon in the spring along the Black River. I did it one year. It's a really fun experience. You can camp along the river. And there are some people, they go and camp all spring long. They bring their RV up and they spend their spring along the Black River helping to protect these sturgeon. So just wanted to share about this. They also host, I think, Boy Scout and the Scouts around for different jamborees and things like that at the Sturgeon Guard as well. So they are also engaging youth in the Sturgeon Guard. You can also learn more about lake sturgeon. This was really just an introduction to lake sturgeon, but you can learn more about the ongoing research that's occurring at Black River by visiting glsturgeon.com. And there's a lot of lessons and other things too if you know any educators. And then you can also adopt a sturgeon. We have flyers up here if you want to learn more, to explore later. But by adopting a sturgeon, you get a certificate of adoption. And this actually is for the sturgeon that we release into the Saginaw River watershed. And as the sturgeon are recaptured and we get updates, we will send out information about the fish that you adopted. In addition, depending on what level you choose, you can even get a sturgeon plushie. So this could be a fun thing for connecting with a variety of different people about sturgeon, and for starting in this year with the acoustic telemetry project. We are now using those sturgeon for the adoptions, so we hope that we can serve more, send out more current updates about the sturgeon and how they're moving throughout the bay, since we'll have all the different acoustic receivers to be able to share that information. And then other ways that people are connecting with sturgeon, even though we aren't to a self-sustaining population, we don't have a sports fishery, people are still catching lake sturgeon while fishing for other species. This youth, I love to highlight Blake Smith. He was I think he was the first person to capture a juvenile sturgeon in the Saginaw River system while ice fishing in over 100 years. And it's just so exciting that the sturgeon are coming back. But when he first caught a sturgeon, he didn't know what it was. But the following year, I think, he caught another one. So it's really exciting to see. I know this year ice fishing hasn't been that great, but we have had a couple of notices on social media that some sturgeon have been captured. If you do ever capture a sturgeon in the Michigan Fishing Guide, there are details on how you can report information on their overall length and things like that. But the best practice is take your photo and get it back in the water as soon as you can. You want to be really quick and get these fish back in the water. So with that, I know I shared a lot of information in a short period of time. I'm happy to answer questions, but I really just want to thank you all for coming to learn more about Lake Sturgeon today. I appreciate you taking the time on your Saturday. It's still very sunny outside, so I appreciate you coming here to learn more about Lake Sturgeon. And I hope I'll see you all at a future release event sometime maybe later this year. So happy to answer any questions. Thank you. Yes?
About how large are the fish when you release them?
So the question was, how large are the fish when they are released? So these fish, they range between like 4 to 6 inches in length, usually, as fingerlings when they're released. And we like to tell the kids when releasing, you're going to be an adult before this fish is. And they don't really understand that. But they go from being very small in size to being a lot bigger by the time they get to be their adults. The fish that were released for the acoustic telemetry project, in order to have that additional tag, those fish needed to be bigger. So those fish were between 6 to 8 inches in length.
When the Corian Reef was worked on a couple of years ago, was that something that they thought about with sturgeon, or was that involved in that, or will they spawn in that?
So the question was about the Corian Reef and whether or not sturgeon would use spawning reef habitats out in Saginaw Bay. So I'm just going to provide a little bit more information about reefs beforehand. So for those of you that didn't know, we have reefs in the Great Lakes. They aren't necessarily the coral reefs that you think of when you envision the ocean. Instead, these are glacial cobble reefs. So the glacial cobble was deposited out into the Great Lakes whenever the glaciers melted and retreated from this area and left the Great Lakes and their wonderful fresh water behind. And they left these glacial cobble habitats out in Saginaw Bay. With thinking about human impacts, thinking of erosion and sedimentation out in Saginaw Bay, a lot of these glacial cobble reefs were filled in with sediment and dirt, so they weren't necessarily the same good spawning habitat for fish. So in 2019, many partners, including many involved in the Saginaw Bay sturgeon restoration effort, restored a 1-acre reef out in Saginaw Bay. This was preceded by doing studies and models to make sure that the reef wouldn't fill back in with sediment. But the goal is to provide spawning habitat for a variety of fish and really support a more resilient fishery. Currently, a lot of the fish in the bay, they're spawning in the rivers. But we want to be able to provide another habitat in order to make sure if anything would happen in the river, they could still spawn in the bay if need be. For lake sturgeon, I think historically they have spawned in the bay, but I think it varies. I think typically they do use more of the river habitat, but I believe there is evidence in the past of them using the bay or using reefs in the bay, but I'm unsure about the Corian reef habitat and whether or not they have any evidence of sturgeon there yet.
When someone catches a fish out here in the river right now, 4.5 feet, 5 feet long, where was that fish spawned at? How long ago are we talking? Were they when you had dams on the Shiawassee and Cass River and that, where would these fish spawn to be that size today? Naturally out in the bay?
Probably not in the bay. So it depends, I guess, on the fish and where they're coming from. I know in the river system, there aren't any current spawning fish. For other fish, they may come from other river systems that aren't dammed in. I don't know if they would go that far upstream in the river.
How far?
I'm not sure how far they would go upstream in the river if it's not part of their natural stream.
Well, if they're getting them out of Saginaw, Zilwaukee area, that means they had to go that far to be where they spawn?
Potentially, I guess. So I think it depends on what fish you're talking about. So like the fish that person
Sturgeon.
caught.
Sturgeon.
No, I know, but when? So like the fish they're catching now, most of those fish they're catching are the ones we have released.
At
It-
4.5, 5 feet long right now?
They can get, I think, I'm not sure how, it ranges in size. Those might be more of the remnant adult populations that aren't necessarily spawning. I can't say for certain without knowing the fish.
I don't know them either,
Yeah.
but I didn't ask them that.
Yeah.
You know, because the river was filthy, and up until recent times, you know, been getting them down there.
Mm-hmm.
And at that size, I didn't know if they would have been coming out of your fingerling program or,
Probably, I mean, it depends on how recently.
well, the last 2-3 years here.
Yeah, I know some of the fish, like I'm trying to think of from pictures, like I think I saw some that were like this big. I don't know if they're like the 5 feet range.
Well,
That
yeah.
seems like a little too big.
They are in the Saginaw News.
Yeah.
The paper shows them that tall.
I can look more into it, and then I can let Sam know if you come to a future Second Saturday program.
Would they been up in the drain ditches and stuff that's not in the Cass and the Tidwassee and the Shiawassee? Where you remove those dams? Would they develop that big in that short a period of time?
I'm not sure, from the ones we've released, I don't think so, but I'm not sure. That'd be a better question to follow up with more of the sturgeon biologist.
It was very interesting. I learned a lot.
Thank you. And up here at the front, I have a lot of handouts. I know I shared a lot of different information today, but I have information about the Saginaw, the Adopt a Sturgeon program, more about the 360 tours, and some other Sea Grant programs we have upcoming, including a virtual Michigan Birding 101. So if you're interested in learning more about birding and exploring some of our winged creatures, you can join via Zoom with one of my Sea Grant Extension colleagues. We also have upcoming fisheries workshops, one focused on Saginaw Bay. It'll take place April 13th, and it will be a hybrid workshop. We're planning for it to be hosted in person at the Saginaw Tribal Center up near Standish. It'll also be available virtually via Zoom, but it's a great way for for anyone that's interested in learning more about the current status of the fishery and being able to ask questions that are a little more difficult to answer for fisheries biologists. So that might be a good opportunity if any of you are interested in taking more of a deeper dive with fish. And then I also have a fact sheet about the Saginaw River opening. So now, officially this year, the Saginaw River is now open from the bay to the Center Street Bridge or William Strength Bridge in Saginaw year-round for walleye fishing. So this is very exciting. The walleye are now considered recovered in status. In past years, the fishing was normally closed in this section to allow for a corridor of fish to go to their spawning grounds. But with the goal of trying to increase access to the fishery to those that might be fishing from shore or on smaller boats that might not be able to go out into the bay, we're hoping that this will be able to provide a lot more access to the river. So there's a fact sheet from Michigan DNR if you want to learn more about this exciting change for the Saginaw River system.
Megan,
Yes.
I was just going to say, sturgeon population, I believe it was last Saturday on Black Lake, they had fishing for sturgeon, and with a limited take, and it was over within 65 minutes.
Yep, they could harvest 6 fish. Those fish were harvested via spear fishing, and it was quick. And that's typical for how it occurs with the chiveries. Because it's really important to make sure you don't go over the limit.
Was any consideration given to sturgeon spawning in deciding what to do about the dams that were washed out in Sanford and upstream from
So those were less, so downstream of those dams, there's still another dam, the Dow Chemical Dam, that is upstream of where the Bob Caldwell boat launch is in Midland. So I don't think that it is as much of something for sturgeon spawning upstream of those dams. But I know with the Dow Chemical Dam, they're working to improve fish passage there. So potentially maybe in the future. Well, thank you all so much for joining today. I appreciate you all learning about lake sturgeon. And you all can go scoot on by for the rest of your Saturday. That's a fun fish joke if you didn't know. The bony cartilage on the sturgeon are called scoots.